Hello once again. We are starting today's program with an eminently important topic and equally eminently competent panel to discuss it. And we have with us, let me start introducing them. We have with us Mr. Peter Kreko from Political Capital, Hungary. We have Eto Buziashvili from Digital Forensics Lab at the Atlantic Council, right? Michal Doroshevich, Fact Check, Belarus. And Ms. Arzu Geibulayeva, Azerbaijan. And Valeriu Pasha from Watchdog MD, Moldova. Correct. And I suppose we could start with the kind of forefather of this newfound Eastern European illiberal democracy or informational autocracy, so to say. And we'd start with Peter, who has authored some really fascinating pieces on about how informational autocracy functions, how it operates, and particularly the tricks and treats it uses to dupe its own population. And sometimes, if your writings are to go by, and correct me if I'm wrong, to kind of make them complicit in them, brainwashing the society to an extent where the society is also willing to play along. So over to you, Peter. Yeah, Hungary is also kind of often thought as a kind of testing lab of these kind of methods, where all the other actors are watching, what can we learn, what can we then adapt into our societies. So how has that come about, Orban emerging as a founding figure of this newfound Eastern European illiberal democracy, and what is the modus operandi of it, so to speak?
Okay, this one seems to work. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you, Raja, for the introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. It's my first time in Moldova, so I'm particularly happy that I have the opportunity. And I'm a bit less happy to have the opportunity to talk about Hungary as some kind of role model of informational autocracies, but this is specifically what Hungary have become, so we have to talk about that as well. And maybe the interesting case about Hungary, and that's a differentiating factor, of course, from some other examples in the panel, that Hungary is the only EU and NATO country where I think this kind of autocracy have been developed to that extent. And of course, Orban had 15 years to do that, so it's a long time. But still, what we can observe right now, that Hungary has become a laboratory of post-truth. And it's quite bizarre, because even if Hungary, Orban have learned most of the disinformation techniques from spin doctors in the United States and Israel, he is exporting back the disinformation strategies to the very countries he learned the techniques from. Plus, he exports them to countries like Georgia. He exports them to countries in the Western Balkans and to other EU member states as well. So what Hungary does today, maybe it's something very similar than other countries will do tomorrow. Of course, Hungary does a lot of things in the public space that are not very new. It's just, a very concentrated use of the resources. And I think that's a key element of informational autocracies. And just by one sentence, so what do we mean by informational autocracies? Following the terminology of Sergei Guriev and Daniel Treisman, who invented the term, or spin dictatorship. So this is a kind of hybrid regime where the legitimacy of the power is reproduced again and again, not through direct oppression and violence, but through the manipulation and distortion of information, for which official conspiracy theories, disinformation techniques, and all the toolkits that Eto and others will talk about in the panel are omnipresent. I would start the presentation, if possible. Okay, thank you very much. So so the title is my presentation would be Hungary's Informational Autocracy Laboratory of Post-Truth. When yesterday, or a few days ago, I sent over 3 academic articles I have written in the topic, and yeah, Vaja was quite scared that I will talk about those in the panel to bore the audience to death, and I try not to. So I would just start by showing a few pictures to you on what kind of billboards you can see in the streets of Budapest. And it's I think one very important aspect of informational autocracy is usually they are not very innovative. They just have a huge resource and huge resource asymmetry to use to their advantage. And this is one example for that in Hungary, where the population was generally not very hostile to Ukraine, for example. Orban could turn the public opinion much more against Ukraine than many expected in light of the history of Hungary that was full of Russian oppression. So this is a billboard on where you can see Volodymyr Zelensky, Ursula von der Leyen, Manfred Weber. Don't let that they decide above our heads. The Hungarian streets were full of billboards like that. There is one other one. Okay, thank you. There is one other one where you see Volodymyr Zelensky and the Hungarian opposition player Péter Magyar, who is ahead of in the polls of Viktor Orban these days, that he's called the Hungarian Zelensky, and it's not a compliment by the governmental party, I have to say, and they are like 2x. So you have, I mean, practically every week you have a new, or every month you have a new campaign like that, and the government uses practically unlimited resources of public funds for that. And one important feature, as I mentioned, of informational autocracies is asymmetric resources. So if you have a state where there are practically no transparency rules applied, then you have unlimited resources to spend on campaigns. To the runoff of the European parliamentary elections back to 2024, the governmental party spent 4 times as much on social media, on Meta and Google, than the opposition altogether. So it's not, there are 4 or 5 shades of orange. Orange is the party, I mean, of the color of the governmental party. It indicates that these are governmental party, the government and governmental proxies. So it was 4 times as much on before the European parliamentary election. Until the beginning of October, when in the European Union, Meta and Google, as it was mentioned today, have, officially at least, stopped accepting political advertisements on their surfaces, Fidesz spent 9 times as much as all the other opposition players. And of course, I mean, if you just look from a big distance for a campaign, you can see that all the players are in the public, all the players are doing advertisements, just the scale is a bit of different. You can see there again 4 shades of orange, so the governmental spendings and pro-governmental spending, it took most of the political advertisements in the social media space in Hungary. So again, you have a highly unequal media space, and of course all the advantage that you have in the public, I mean in the traditional media, but 80% of the Hungarian traditional media is in pro-governmental hands. So this is something that you have also in the social media. So can social media help Hungarian democracy? In light of that, it's hard to be optimistic about that. Again, if you take a look at these polls, this is it indicates that Hungary spent the second most on political advertisement to the run-up of the European parliamentary elections in 2024. On Facebook only, which is the blue line, the overall ad spendings, it spent even more than Germany. Germany, a country that have a population of 8 times as much as Hungary, and the economy 20 times as big as Hungary. And it just indicates how that if you have an informational autocracy, then you can just use practically your country as really a laboratory of post-truth and disinformation. Most of this money were spent on disinformation campaigns, targeting Ukraine, targeting Brussels, pushing for the so-called peace narrative that the warmongers are only in Brussels, while Russia wants peace, while Hungary wants peace, and also a lot of conspiracy theories and hostile narratives. And this is, and yeah, I would probably stop here. I have many more slides, but I would let others to deliver their messages as well. This is how non-electoral period looks like in an informational autocracy in the social media space. So it's like, and this is how an electoral period looks like in a non-informational autocracy. So in an informational autocracy, Hungary has spent about 8 times as much in 2025, while it was not an election year in Hungary. Czech Republic spent much less on the social media space. So I think my argument would be that the results that we can usually see in the public opinion polls in Hungary, that that the governmental campaigns have an impact on the public opinion. It's not because that Hungarians are generally receptive to such messages, but if you push them in an industrial scale, then of course they will have an impact. And in the follow-up, I might share some experiences about how the disinformation actors, including the government, are adapting to the new situation when political advertisements cannot be delivered anymore. So thank you for your attention.
What works? Stick with this. So one follow-up, if I may, one quick follow-up. In the beginning you said that I don't know whether it was meant as a criticism that Orban's messaging is not innovative, it's just the resources that they have. Do they need to be innovative? Because why fix what's not broken? And I mean, I was reading on Andrew Jackson, former, one of the divisive US presidents back then, and still is. And the narrative back then between the Whigs and Jackson is eerily similar to what is happening in the US now. And why fix what's not broken? If it works, if those things touch their voters, why do they need to be innovative, especially when they have the research side, in the as their advantage? Oh, it doesn't. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. At least we cannot speak parallelly, so there is an advantage of that. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think that's a sad reality. I think you don't have to be very innovative if you want to run an efficient campaign. Right now, they have to be more innovative because they just cannot rely on social media paid advertisements as they did before in light of the new policies of the Commission and the application by the platforms. But I think what Orban have just put into perfection is a kind of campaign method that is well known in the United States as well, which just builds on polarizing narratives, and you create some kind of ruptures in the society, and you are always on the side of 80%. I'm with the 80% pro-vaccination, pro-peace, anti-immigration, and you are the pro-migrants, you are the pro-war, you are the anti-vaccine. So, and that's pretty much. Exactly, and the next big test for this regime will be the elections next April in 2026, because right now it seems that the Hungarian informational autocracy is much less efficient in pushing through its messages, even in economic terms, even in other kinds of terms. So, and right now Orban is lagging behind his challenger in the polls. I think that if there would be a free and fair election, it would be pretty sure that the opposition will win the election, but it definitely will be unfair. It's a question if it will be free. So it's up to decide. But again, the big difference, I think, between Hungary and Georgia, but definitely Azerbaijan, for example, that mostly, I mean, it's toxic messaging and toxic disinformation campaigns, but these are usually not followed by arrests and direct repression.
We'll see. Very much the case up north in Belarus, I think, and we'll move over there in a second. Let's look at Mr. Lukashenko's attempts to make his nation increasingly more miserable. And Mr. Doroshevich here has prepared a presentation on coordinated actions of Belarusian state propaganda on hows, whens, and whys of it. Over to you, Michal.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for invitation to this excellent event. And let us say it about Hungarian laboratory. I will talk about Belarus laboratory. And when your country, possible presentation? I need presentation. Yes, when your country becomes autocracy, you lose home, friends, jobs, and cannot work work openly without self-censorship. Oh, okay, thank you so much. And cannot work with disinformation from inside. You cannot protect your sources. You cannot access documents safely. I would like to say some personal words. My niece is over 50 years old, and she directed the biggest Belarusian independent think tanks. She has been in prison more than 4 years. Her sentence is 10 years. Her crime, expertise, and activism and became dangerous. This is not accident. This autocratic government force voices out. Probably you know 300 or 600,000 people from Belarus need to relocate in other countries, Poland, Lithuania, Germany, and Georgia. And but exiles gives us opportunity to work openly, to try to find something about disinformation, about FIMI, and we don't just say some suspicious. We try to find methods, try to find using evidence as data. And I prepared 3 examples. First example is Romanian elections. We tested information and found warfare. For example, Belarusian media said nothing about Romanian elections before elections, only after elections. This was warming up audience as state influence languages before Moldovan elections. We looked at this situation in long term, and we found this launch Moldovan elections in May. We found 42 videos and main stories appeared first about electoral circus, stories about French intelligence interference, and conspiracy theories about dead souls. This is important. Romania was a test, a target Moldovan elections. And second, is more better. Moldovan escalation from June to August, the campaign grew much bigger. 40 5 videos, 4 million views, and Igor Dodon visited Minsk. He met Lukashenko, and this state-level coordination. Main message was simple. Moldova is danger from West, election fraud, EU interference, Belarus, Russia offer stability. Our important finding, 37% promoted pro-Russian candidate. Of course, they used energy crisis, and they listened to failed integration. We documented this, and we prepared disarm incident alert. We found the coordination systematically. Next, more interesting and absolutely new, Belarus's TikTok launch pad. What does this mean? TikTok restrict Russian users in 2022 after full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine, but Belarus came the workaround, coordinating Belarusian Russian state propaganda. Huge numbers, but how works? First, take Russian TV content, second, repackage in Belarus, and trending sounds, add subtitles. Finally, reach Moldovan audience. TikTok blocked Russian accounts, Belarusian channels took over. Belarus became a breach. Russian messages reach Europe without platform blocks. Next phase about Moldovan elections in September and early October, because elections day doesn't over elections campaign. We found 3 phases: planned distrust, increased pressure during the election moments, and some more important, what do you say, Belarusian authorities about after elections. And of course, coordination, state channels worked together, and new case probably do not listen about this situation with balloons on Belarus-Lithuania borders. This case shows something else, because exists physical event, balloons launched from Belarus, and problem for Lithuania. Problem in numbers, many flights cancelled, passengers affected, border security went up. Lithuanian Prime Minister invoked NATO Article 4. We analyzed Telegram, and for example, we found when one moment 10 financial Telegram channel publication about this situation. Incident was immediately weaponized, and Belarusian toxic channels and Russian channels both escalated information. Incident was reframed to save messaging calls. Important principle: physical actions create campaign. And of course, in some Belarus exists propaganda conveyor, works like factory. 4 stage. First stage, Belarusian official informational agency prepared report and information, and have similarity 40%, typical 10 or less percent is second phase injection, and retransmission 1 or 0 hours, and also suppression. Very important case in I have, well, don't work. Okay. Oh, about situation in USA, its closure is boosted information, probably 80%. And no journalism. This is information warfare. And finally, what need to do? We need platform transparency. Yesterday, many words said about DSA, and researchers need data, timestamp data, detection tools, and second very important issues, support researchers. Oh, sorry, international cooperation. Of course, for example, when using disarm foundation methods and need cross-border research networks. And finally, need support researchers in exile, funding for research, protection for sources, and infrastructure for monitoring. Unfortunately,
I mean, thank you very much, Michal, for this very sobering, if bleak presentation. Always better to be realistic about things and knowing how things really are. And one of the, I mean, I was listening to it, and a creeping fear was that, okay, how much of that is going to happen in my country next? Because it's kind of a template, isn't it? You know, how to do it. Would you call what Belarusian state propaganda is doing a success from, you know, from their own perspective? Are they doing it well? Are they competent?
Good question. And success Belarusian state propaganda in country very dangerous and very sensitive issues, because democratic forces have only one very restricted channels as internet. Belarusian state propaganda has television, radio, and print. And of course, when all time you listen to Belarusian propaganda, some the good person who live in other information sources and no situation when all around you listen some in TV, in radio. Yes, absolutely, echo chambers. And second, very important for us, Belarusian state propaganda involved in more bigger campaign as a part of Russian propaganda. And we see this situation in YouTube channels because YouTube blocked Russian propagandists, and Belarusian state-owned YouTube channels using us bypass these conventions. And of course we need, because I said about Moldovan elections, interference, about situation with Poland elections, because difference between Poland and Romania elections, Belarus more involved in Poland elections. No information about Romanian elections before, but after, because target is Moldova. And of course we need now thinking what's next election in region, and we're talking about Eastern Partnership countries, probably next target Armenia, for example.
Not to make this even more depressing than it already is, but I mean, if you were to look at your side, yeah, no. I mean, my question. I meant my question. If you were to look at your side and the state apparatus that you're against, and to call it a David and Goliath, that would be an understatement, right? I mean, you are that's a Goliath that has a huge tower shield, and you are there without even a sling. So how are you going to go about it? I mean, what are the realistic rates of success, and where do you get that sling that to have even an offshot chance?
Tell us, enlighten us.
So easy to ask questions, right? Yes. The questions that they're nuanced. It's
No answer. This is clear.
Speaking of echo chambers, then let's move downward, southward to Azerbaijan, and we have Arzu here, who authored a wonderful report for OC, Freedom Media, on the threats to journalists in exile. But before we go deeper into that, let's start with sort of a retrospective in Azerbaijan. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm woefully ignorant when it comes to Azerbaijan, but the human rights problems, the media freedom problems, etc., that was in Azerbaijan, say, 10, 15 years ago, they probably haven't gone away. In fact, I have the creeping suspicion that the situation might have deteriorated. And yet, speaking of echo chambers once again, when you look at the echo chambers both domestically in Azerbaijan society and international society, it somehow has gone deaf, more quieter. It's almost like winning the war has given the sort of a carte blanche to the government not to be criticized for its transgression. Is that the correct reading of the situation? Does that
I'll take this. Thank you. Thank you for the question, and apologies for luring you into a very depressing panel. You can basically look at the case of Azerbaijan from different angles in terms of why the situation hasn't improved but only deteriorated over the years in the country. And you can look at that through the waves of crackdown, right? We saw the first serious wave of crackdown targeting civil society, including media, in 2013, 2014. At the time, in the Western world, in Brussels and elsewhere, the conversations around advocacy on placing more pressure on a country that was still relatively weak internationally, what we were hearing in response was, well, Azerbaijan is not close to the European borders, and the country has energy resources that everybody will need at some point down the line. And so putting pressure on a country that basically has no interest, it was getting harder and harder to expect any commitment to placing human rights or freedom of expression on the agenda of the European stakeholders in their conversations with the leaders of the Azerbaijani government. And also, in that time frame that we're looking at within the first wave of crackdown, it was also around the time when there was a conversation around adopting a resolution on political prisoners in Azerbaijan, which failed. And the reason for that was what we later learned was caviar diplomacy. The government of Azerbaijan invested heavily in policymakers, in decision makers in the European circles, but also in the US, because it wasn't just happening on the European turf. This very aggressive form of lobbying that was taking place really served the purpose. Not only there was no resolution, but the criticism that the civil society was expecting to hear back very much kind of fell on statements of concern, a few resolutions that weren't very strong and didn't really have much power over the country. Now, in that time frame, as we moved forward, as you rightly said, the situation did not improve. There were cosmetic reforms. Some people were released who were originally arrested in the first wave crackdown. There were some replacements of the old cabinet. But all of those, for anyone who really would have understood the country and its structure and the leadership that was in power would have known that all of that is a facade of a very persistent leadership that was only interested in preserving its own powers, and gradually, through that preservation of powers, really remove any potential enemy, right? And so in that time frame, we're also talking about the very consistent approach to media capture. If anything, Azerbaijan poses as a really sort of good case study for someone who wants to look at a timeline of very quiet, not so aggressive, over the years turning into a much more aggressive wave of crackdown, targeting media that wasn't just not aligned with the authorities, that wasn't just on a government payroll, but the media that was investigating, the media that was actually going into the regions across the country, reporting on the stories, and really preventing people from getting access to this kind of reporting. And with that, we saw first, it started with this minor targeting of removing independent outlets from the radio waves. Then it was the newspapers. Then it was the actual arrest and physical intimidation. We've also had journalists who were killed. We saw how by adopting and investing in technology, they've also enrolled in digital censorship, digital crackdown on media and civil society, more broadly speaking. And throughout all of this time, when someone would raise a question about why Azerbaijan is still a member of Council of Europe with so many journalists behind bars or with so many political members, political prisoners in jail, still there were no clear answers that would justify the decision-making that we were seeing, the conversations that we were seeing. And fast forward to November 2023, which kind of was just the culmination of this very sinister and very gradual takeover, where starting from one outlet, moving on to the next, by now, as I'm sitting here, we have 25 journalists affiliated with newsrooms, their editors, the freelancers that have contributed to these platforms, the experts that were interviewed by these platforms behind bars. Some of them have been sentenced, some of them are awaiting trial, and all of them were accused of bogus crimes, financial crimes, smuggling, which were then increased to 7, 8 additional other crimes, including tax evasion and illegal entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth. And the last round of exchanges that I was part of in conversations with the European stakeholders, I personally was told in a meeting that, well, we can't really do anything right now. What we need to talk about is how we can bring Azerbaijani delegation back to the Council of Europe, to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, because this is all done for the future generations. And I was baffled by that response. And I actually asked, I said, but what future generation are you talking about? In a country that has led to an exodus of significant number of young population who have left the country and continue to leave the country because they see no future. And we're talking about lawyers, we're talking about doctors, we're talking about academics, we're talking about researchers. What future generation are we negotiating over? Because soon there won't be. And then when you look at the age group of currently targeted people, current civil society, they're all young people. I mean, we have young scholars, Bahrouz, Iqbal, who are PhD candidates or who were doing research on various topics. You have journalists, rights defenders, and I think that, in a nutshell, kind of what took me back to 10 years ago when I first started doing these meetings abroad and trying to get an idea of what can be done in terms of applying pressure on the authorities. it took me back to that year when I suddenly realized that nothing has changed, not only externally, but also internally. The only thing that has changed over these years are the names of the people who are being placed behind bars, the sentences that they're being given, and the crimes they're being accused of. And then in that time frame, the authorities have become more authoritarian. They resort to more means of crackdown, and they go not only after the people in the country, but also abroad. They target people who've left into the exile through transnational repression, through digital transnational repression. And there is still no significant criticism or no significant plan of how to deal with countries like Azerbaijan. And that leaves me really in a place where I sometimes question what's the point, because we just keep reporting on these stories and we keep telling, especially those in exile, that everyone needs to be resilient, but like this is not feasible, as there is nothing that feeds you back in return, right? There is no sort of protein that you can get from the work that you're doing, as you're not seeing much progress.
But on that work, I think it does. How close have we reached, or how close are we to this becoming a new normal of sorts, becoming a Saudi of a South Caucasus? When Azerbaijan, excellent tech-oriented country, reliable partner, has oil, very happy to trade with this oil. Oh, journalists are oppressed? Well, too bad, but that's what they do. That's the norm. Are we there already, or are we? How close are we to that?
Well, if you remember, Baku was already kind of named as the Dubai of the Caucasus because of the construction that was taking place in this country for years. But I think in terms of political definitions and how, or in which category of countries we're placing Azerbaijan, to me, it doesn't even matter if it's next to Saudis or the Qataris, just because it's, technologically innovative. Because at the end of the day, when you look at that innovation, you also realize that innovation isn't deep enough. It's not based on research. It's not based on experiences of people who know what they're doing. It's also very superficial. And yes, it may look grand, but that's just the surface of the capital city. If you visit Azerbaijan and you go beyond capital Baku and you travel to a remote village in Azerbaijan, you'll just see how not technologically developed the country is, and just how basic the needs of the residents are. We're talking about things like access to running water, access to electricity, access to basic infrastructure. I'm not even talking about the state of village schools in a country that poses itself as this innovator, this nation that invests in young people. I mean, either they live on a different planet called Azerbaijan, and we are seeing a very different country called Azerbaijan, or something is clearly wrong in that definition.
Another question, at the risk of sounding naive, if the peace process with Armenia were to be a genuine peace process, a successful peace process, do you see situation improving in terms of more attention put into the domestic situation in Azerbaijan, more inward-looking, both domestically and internationally?
I get asked that question a lot, and I'm of the opinion that I don't see a genuine effort at the moment. And the reason I say this is because back when Azerbaijan and Armenia fought the second war, the 44-day war, some of the sort of opposition and independent members of the civil society were of the opinion that if we support the war now, then Azerbaijan will go through reforms because the victory will bring change to this country. And it was mind-boggling to hear former political prisoners, journalists who've written about corruption, human rights defenders who've defended other political prisoners, talk about these reforms in a country that would have still been ran by the same government, by the same leaders, by the same decision makers. Fast forward to now, after Washington meeting, and after several visits to Yerevan and Baku, we still do not have genuine approach to conflict transformation and reconciliation. You know, this peace agenda that they are throwing around at these meetings, there is no timeline on when they're planning on bringing broader public into the conversation, when they're planning on bringing veteran civil society folks who were engaged in negotiations and discussions after the first war, even before the war. No one is really...
Is that a question of when or if they're planning to bring those people in?
If it was if, then the first genuine effort would have been releasing Bahru Samadov, releasing Iqbal Abilov, and releasing all of the journalists and other political prisoners from jail. Then I would say yes, then there could be an if. But we haven't seen the signs of that. And we have not seen, as I said, the peace negotiations to me are also feel like they're very carefully staged. You know, people are handpicked who goes into these meetings, and I'm pretty sure what's in their talking points is also pre-decided.
Now I'm feeling home because we're moving over to Georgia, and we have Eto Boziashvili here, who I'm happy to call a personal friend, although that's likely to be last on her, personal honors. And we could have hardly picked a better fit for this, for talking about Georgia's authoritarian takeover of Georgia's information space, because she's not only been researching that for years, but has been also on the receiving end on this. And the question I wanted to open up with is that listening to all these presentations and speeches, it's I had this belief that it was there before, it kind of got firmer now, that from the dizzying heights of being beacon of democracy in the region, we've just now become the intern at the club of illiberal democracies, and we are trying to learn, we are trying to be very eager to look, what the big boys are doing, what Orban is doing, what Aliyev is doing, what Lukashenko is doing. The question is that, much like, the question that I directed at Michal, how competent is the Georgian government in absorbing all this international experience and adapting it back at home?
Thank you, Vaja. Very briefly, they are very competitive, very good. Competent in that. But before I will dive deeper into the topic and deconstruct what happened in Georgia, I really want to thank Tamar for organizing this and for her courage of standing up against authoritarian take in Georgia, and what is she doing there, and also all the Georgian representatives of media and NGO organizations. I admire your fight, and I'm sure that we will be able to win this fight in Georgia. But before we will win this fight, let's deconstruct what happened in Georgian information space and physical space as well. I would divide Georgia's past several years into two phases: pre-2022, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and post-2022. What was happening before is that openly pro-Russian far-right groups and political parties were the main actors which were driving Georgia towards Russia and the authoritarian rule. Back then, Georgian government was more of the covert player, which was staying behind the scenes and benefiting and contributing to this ecosystem in the information and physical space. All of our attention was dragged on the openly pro-Russian actors. But honestly, there were signals even before. There was a great understanding in Georgian civil society that the main player is just staying behind the scenes, and this is just the play of our attention dragging towards the wrong place. The far-right and pro-Russian or openly pro-Russian groups were shaping information space. They were flooding Facebook because Facebook is the main platform in Georgia. Unfortunately, Facebook equals to internet. And of course, these actors were represented massively on Facebook. The infrastructure was just growing, starting increasingly from 2019. They were creating massive Facebook networks, which were running in coordination. There were pages and groups working together. In many cases, it was hard to determine who they were, but there was a good understanding of the actors who were running this Facebook, the whole Facebook infrastructure. But the main thing that changed in the 2022 and the February 2022 was that Georgian Dream, the Georgian Dream government, they became the main actor pushing Georgia towards Russia. They didn't need openly pro-Russian groups anymore after Russia's full-scale invasion. They centralized the whole information space around their assets and started to push the narratives which were sowing fear in Georgian society. There is always this question, like, how exactly the authoritarian takeover happened in Georgia, because Georgian society has always been pro-European, pro-Western. The trick was that the Georgian Dream government was always camouflaging themselves as pro-democracy, pro-EU country, a pro-EU government. All the elections that they have participated were full of EU flags. The promises of leading country towards EU, towards NATO. There was this messaging that there exists two kinds of European Union. The first one is Orban, who is the defender of traditional values, and we are striving towards that kind of EU. And the second one is Brussels, that is dictating rules over us. So we are going towards EU, but we're going towards Orban-style EU. So this was even in 2024, when all the cards were open and everybody has a clear understanding what Georgian Dream was, they were still displaying EU flags on their election banners when they were even attacking openly European Union and the Western allies. So this was a very important camouflage. And if we take a look at the information space, we're talking about the massive infrastructure of Facebook networks, of Telegram networks, even Twitter, former Twitter, currently X, which is not popular in Georgia. It was also massively utilized by the Georgian government to communicate their messages outside of Georgia. There were these signals, these clear signals many years ago, but unfortunately, even though there was understanding inside Georgia, the understanding in our Western partners was low, either from not understanding what was happening or maybe just closing eyes on some things. Because I want to highlight one of the cases that happened in 2023. As you might know, when Facebook detects coordinated inauthentic networks, they are taking down those networks and they are attributing these networks to specific actors. These kind of cases happened multiple times in Georgia. The first of this instance happened in 2019 when Meta openly attributed an inauthentic network to Georgian Dream. And then the other cases followed. But the interesting case happened in 2023, like 2 years ago, when Meta openly attributed a network which was targeting Georgians, which was promoting Russia and targeting the West to Georgian Dream-led government, and they took down the massive network of the Georgian Dream government. And this is a year when, and they attributed this network to Strategic Communications Department of the Georgian government, which was financed and built by the funding of the Western allies, including EU and UK, unfortunately, in 2023. So we learned that the money which should have been spent on building democracy in Georgia was spent on undermining democracy in Georgia and strengthening the government, strengthening the authoritarian rule. But unfortunately, even this signal was not enough to stop business as usual with Georgian Dream. Even following months, we have seen the cooperation between Western allies and Georgian Dream. So these kind of signals, unfortunately, led to the weakening. I mean, this is not a good signal when it comes to democracy, when NGOs and media, when they are fought with the rules, which are not fair, and then our allies, where everybody is basically looking at, they are still continuing business as usual. But yes, the lessons were learned very, very late, when in 2024, the physical takeover of the Georgian NGOs and media started. But again, signals were there. Many NGOs and media were trying to build, to ring the bell of the upcoming disaster in Georgia, but unfortunately we were late. And just briefly on the election year in 2024, there was a massive Russian meddling in Georgia, but what was very different from Moldova was that Russia had their own actor in Georgia. It was Georgia's government. So there was this massive difference because in Moldovan case, and I'm sure Valeriu will be talking about it, Russia deployed covert networks, different kinds of networks to influence Moldovan society, while in Georgia, the main actor of Russian takeover was Georgian Dream. I'm not going to dive deeper into the connection, like what is a vertical between Tbilisi and Moscow. I will just highlight one fact that US sanctioned Georgian Dream founder Bidzina Ivanishvili under the executive order, which targets Kremlin agents. And he's not the only one who was sanctioned for being the Kremlin agent. So if you're interested in the vertical between Tbilisi and Moscow, this is the area that you should be looking into. And yes, Georgian Dream was one of the directions that meddling happened in 2024, but another direction was the overt one, which happened by Russia. And we're talking about Facebook networks, which Meta attributed to Russia and its security services, saying that Russia was trying to influence Georgian society and make voters choose anti-Western direction. Then there was a Telegram network specifically tied to FSB, Russian security services. Then there were, in the leading up to elections, during the whole summer, SVR, Russia's foreign intelligence service, were issuing numerous statements trying to sow fear in Georgian society and say that if Georgian Dream loses, this means that the US and the West, they interfered in Georgia, and Russia is ready to help Georgian Dream take back power. So this massive buildup of first online infrastructure and then the narratives which were similar between Georgian Dream and the Russia basically contributed and led to where we are now.
Excellent. On that Western, I would not call it interference, the business as usual approach, in the hopes, I presume, to salvage what is left and not to, I think from the conversations I've had with the Western diplomat, the main motivation of them are, if we press further, we will get another Belarus that will even more firmly will be entrenched on the Russian orbit. And speaking of Belarus and speaking of Azerbaijan and speaking of taking notes, if we were to look at the recent arrests of the political leaders, or rather, in some cases, renewal of the prison sentences of those leaders that were already jailed, I think one conclusion can be drawn that they've taken lessons from Belarus, they've taken lessons from Aliyev, and they've decided to play the long game where each time you're pressured, you escalate. And we know, I think I could have taken lessons directly from Moscow, because the man who is probably the world's foremost specialist in this, he sits in the Kremlin. But if that's the approach, if the approach is to play the long game versus the West, versus the international pressure, who do you think blinks first?
I think that Georgian society is showing already that they are not going to blink first. Because, as you might know, the protests in Georgia are continuing for already more than 1 year. There is a very good understanding of what is happening in the country, and that this fight is very long fight, and the resistance is a direct evidence of this.
I'm quite confident with the resolve of the pro-Western Georgian society not to give up. I'm not so assured about the resolve of the Western partners not to come back to the negotiating table and try to salvage what's still left there.
This is the work I think that Georgian civil society needs to do now, because unfortunately the message that Georgian society has been receiving during the past couple of years was stability over democracy, unfortunately.
Fair enough.
Be stable. This is very conflicting region. We had war in fairly. We have war in Ukraine, and our attention is should be going there. And of course, situation in Ukraine is also Georgia's priority. But I don't think that the message stability over democracy was the good message for Georgians, because this message directly led to what is happening in Georgia. Just like final thing, Georgians know that their homework is to defend their country and democracy. But I think that they are also waiting for their allies in the West to do their homework, which is to stand up for human rights and democracy as well.
Fair enough. We've come full circle and come to Moldova at last, to Mr. Valery Pasha. And Moldova seems to be one lucky exception on this panel, where there is not an illiberal regime trying to preserve its hold over society, although I think there are plenty of actors, both internal and external, trying to change and reverse that. So over to you, Valery. What's the playing ground like in Moldova, and what are the rules that this game is playing with?
Not like, oh no, it works. So probably it just takes some time. A little bit of the Soviet type technique. You just need to wait a little bit until it warms. Yes. So first of all, thanks for inviting me on this, as you told, depressive, such a good time. Look on the weather outside. It's a Saturday morning. What a good time to add some this autumn
much needed ennui in your life.
Mood. Yeah. Now, apart of jokes, this is a very serious topic. I partially agree that Moldova is a lucky case in this post-imperial space in Eastern Europe. Just think of the fact that Moldova, a part of the Baltic countries, but like countries which joined this community of independent states after the elections, is the only country which had government changes only through elections. So we never had revolutions, we never had regimes which managed to conserve the power and to transform elections in a formality, or simply like stop having electoral processes or electoral democracy. But it doesn't mean that we didn't have attempts of different leaders to build authoritarian regimes in the country. It happened. And when we started our organization back in so the idea was created back in 2016, late 2016, it was exactly as a response to the instauration of a quasi-authoritarian regime which captured the whole state. That was a very kind of weird type of regime where just a very corrupt oligarch captured everything through blackmail and corruption. He simply bought the majority in the parliament. He controlled the justice, the whole justice system, so such things as independent judges or prosecutors wasn't imaginable. Everything again through blackmail, through corruption. He controlled the most of the media space at that time. TVs still were very important, and he used to control about more than 60% of this space, and of course invested a lot in propaganda and other forms of keeping the power. Indeed, they learn one from another, and I totally echo this assumption that there are these spin doctors or dirty political strategists, mostly from more or less the same school of Arthur Finkelstein. Same people sitting sometimes in Bucharest, sometimes in Budapest, sometimes in Belgrade, in Tbilisi, in Kiev, in Chisinau. So they travel, they learn one from another and just come again and again. Such ideas as, for example, changing the electoral system, as magic, and try to present it. We all passed through that. So immediately after this oligarch Plahotniuc in 2016 captured and kept the power in the country, he proceeded with the change of the electoral system to try to preserve his power. And our goal was to resist it and to get it down. So we created an NGO, and we very clearly stated what's our mission. We want him down. Which is pretty much can look as a political statement, as a political mission. Yes, I don't have any problem with that. So that is an idea. You do not play the political neutrality, which is normal and it's a must-have in a democracy, with someone who kills your democracy. I do not like to give lessons, particularly to other countries. So do not take it as that. Just as examples and maybe some sources of inspiration. And let me, as we call it in Moldova, whistle in the house. We are talking here about the capacity and how proficient are the governments, these authoritarian regimes, to control the public space, the info space, and to manipulate public opinion. But no one mentioned the opposition, the political opposition, because this is the indispensable pillar of resistance, and this is the actual solution. We will not bring into power NGOs and journalists. If we get down these bad guys, we need other good guys. And it is, from my perspective at least, it's not only the fact that they are so good in keeping the power and they are so smart and you mentioned, they are even not creative, they are not that adaptive. They often use the dominance in resources. But I think that they explore much more the weaknesses and inefficiency and lack of political proficiency and creativity of the political opposition. And we passed all of that here in Moldova. I know we are on air probably, but I remember the 2015/2019 period. We had two key opposition parties. So first of all, these parties were, and the protest movements and the parties were incredibly penetrated by the agents of the then kleptocratic regime. When opposition leaders such as Andrei Năstase were planning massive protests and almost a revolution, more than half of the people in the room were the people who later proven to be the agents of those regime of this oligarch Plahotniuc. So incredibly weak, if not say stupid, opposition leaders. And we had those endless protests. Not that, not those dynamic and dramatic like in Georgia. Moldovans are much less, energetic and
phlegmatic, I think.
Probably. So we are not Georgians. We do not have those resolve of resistance. Our civil society is incredibly more weaker than the Georgian one is, for example. I don't think that our people in millions would stay on the streets, get beaten and tortured as it happened with hundreds of thousands of Belarusians. That was incredible. We never had such type of resistance in front of such a violence from the state. So these people are very courageous. I cannot say that we did the same. But the difference was, and well, again, talking about the opposition. So we were coming one protest after another years, 2016, 2017, 2015 it started, huge gatherings of people. People were coming from other parts of the country, from the north, from the south, sometimes often older people paying their last money just to travel to resist, to come here to a protest in Chisinau. Including, you mentioned about the people fleeing Azerbaijan. We are a democracy, but much more people, professionals are leaving and left Moldova. So it's not that much connected to it only. And the problem was that there was no plan. So well, let's protest and something will happen. Nothing was happening. The regime was laughing. Yes, they were afraid, people come and so on, but there was no plan. How do we actually get rid of this regime? So we invite people to Chisinau to protest in front of the government on Sunday in front of an empty building. So what? Next? Nothing. In 2018, the regime illegally cancelled results of elections of the mayor of the capital city. Absolutely outrageous. People got very angry on the streets. Again, protests, and the opposition leaders, including Maya Sandu at that time, they just killed the protest because there was no any plan. So, as I mentioned, I cannot give lessons, but I can ask questions. So what is the plan in Georgia? Protest end with what? How do the opposition take power? I think that similar question was very liable for Belarus in 2020. So that opposition, with all due respect for the courage of these people, but I think that they are more part of a problem than of a solution. Because they get on the street, resist the regime. And what's the final plan?
What was the final plan in case of Moldova?
In case of Moldova, how it ended, so these regimes, they still have to imitate elections, at least to try to keep the legitimacy, especially in smaller, weaker countries. And it happened all around the region. Even in Azerbaijan, everyone understands that, this is not a true election. But they should keep this legitimacy, including for being in the club of others like that. And we saw an opportunity, and when I say we, I say people in civil society. So there was a small group of us who came after an absolutely rigged election in 2019 in February with a solution, how actually to get rid of this corrupt regime. And we made something which, we proposed something which most of the people immediately called impossible. So we actually proposed to unite pro-Russian and pro-European parties in the parliament just to get rid of this oligarchic corrupt regime, which was transforming in a better established authoritarian regime. At the beginning, very few people trusted in that. But what we managed to do through communication with the society, with the international stakeholders, to get endorsement for that. In the end, people started to put pressure on the political parties to do so. So it was a plan. And this is why this plan was endorsed by the partners. So when you go and ask, do your homework, they will, of course, there are true believers in this part of the Atlantic, those part of the Atlantic, people who trust in human rights, in democracy, but there is also pragmatic international politics. So these people say, okay, so what's your plan? And from my perspective, one of the parts of the solution is to improve the quality of the political opposition. Hungary, again, I'm not a connoisseur, an expert. I have some observations during previous elections, for example. And what I also know, I know about the numbers, about the expenditures, but I think that the supporters of the opposition, the middle class, the urban class of Hungary, altogether are much more richer than Orban and all his oligarchs. No, I think that the revenue of all those millions of people is higher. No, it's higher. No, this. So I don't think that.
Look up the figures on the wealth of Hungarian pro-governmental oligarchs, and it's not one of them. There are dozens of them, and they are all on the list of Forbes as the most wealthy man in Hungary.
Agree.
No, the accumulation of wealth in a very nepotistic manner is so developed. It's not like that you have the how to say, the urban elites who are very well off, who are very, glamorous and very elitistic, versus you have the populist leader who is poor. No, this is just the very opposite. Full stop.
Well, I think that the level of wealth of the urban middle class and younger people in Hungary is not that bad that they cannot collect 10 million euro to support pro-democracy forces and to try to balance the expenditures. This is one.
In that, I totally understand. So the donations from the Hungarian Soviet Society, I mean, it's decreasing. I mean, it's increasing still low. In that, I totally agree. But still, there's a huge.
And we saw similar situation here when, before 2016, funding the political campaign from small donations didn't exist. Simply didn't exist. It was always just business people. And then it was just someone tried it and ran a campaign and found the money. Not big money, but enough to run a decent campaign. So this is what I mean, is we need to put more pressure on political parties, political opposition, if we want to succeed. At least this is our lesson. This is how we managed to turn it back. And now in the last 6 years, we have much less to do with this kind of resistance. But we had those experience. Now, unfortunately, we have to face this Putin's interference, which is huge, is much harder to overcome because, again, of resources, and the resources are crazy. Even a whole state cannot resist it alone. But at least this is an element I always see as a weakness. Why do the pro-democracy forces are not successful enough? Because you need a plan and you need a political part of this pro-democracy movement, which can be capable of implementing or becoming at least a beneficiary of those plans. If you have that, if that sounds more or less credible, then you have the real endorsement of the foreign partners. Otherwise, you will have just nice words, nice yes, we will support you, and we are very much concerned, but no actual action. Thanks.
Thank you, Valerio. Some much needed insights from Moldovan experience and a lot to unpack there. Over to the audience, if they have any questions, we are more than happy to answer to you. I don't see any raised hands, and I assume it's because we were so comprehensive that we covered every possible angle and topic. Anyone? No. Okay. Once again, we'll assume we were too good. With that, there was a question, yeah. We were too good, but not for Regis.
Regis Zantem, a journalist, European, based in Tbilisi for 24 years. And working in the region. Indeed, I agree with Valerio in the way that I feel we are sometimes having some cliche that like Georgia is more pro-European, more open, so it would be more easy. And finally, I see that the for example, the revolution in Armenia succeeded, while the society apparently was more under Russian pressure, I mean, back in 2018, for example, or even in Belarus, when I compared the crowd in 2020 August and in the fall of 2020, and in Georgia there were more people in the street comparatively in Belarus. So maybe we don't understand fully what's going on. I feel indeed what's important, it's more a remark and then you can do whatever you want with it. But I feel indeed that and maybe we don't understand this perfectly, but the fact that there is a politician which at some point takes the lead, as Saakashvili did back in 2003, or as Pashinyan did in 2018, makes the difference probably. Because in Georgia we see that there is no, indeed we don't know where it goes. There was a debate since 3 years, what should we do? Should we have more hard movement or not? And this finally leads to nowhere. I feel that the missing point was on the 1st of May last year. That day I saw on the place the Maidan barricade, tags on the parliament, people starting to do to take the urban mobilier to make some barricades, and some say, no, we don't do that because it's too dangerous, we don't want to go there. And that day there was probably 100,000 people in the street, which is huge in Georgia. So it was probably the missing point. Another remark, we see the importance of I feel one of the major events this last 15 years was the appearance, the creation of investigative newsrooms, like RISE in Moldova, which is doing wonderful work, IFACT in Georgia and so on. And they make the difference often because with their investigation, especially in showing, exposing, for example, the relation with Russia. I remember some RISE investigation. So what can we do with that also? Because I feel, for me, for example, I'm saying since 4 years that Russia is acting in Georgia. This is not only Ivanishvili. Ivanishvili doesn't want even most of the things that he did. He was reluctant to do it. So, and when we manage to show the difference, I mean, how Russia is behind this, which is very difficult, it's more easy for us to explain to the Western capitals that what's going on. So that was just my remarks.
Thank you very much. I think, yeah, I mean, we'll take it on board as a remark and acute assessment of the situation rather than a question asked to the panels. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Corina Ceapoi, Moldova. I would support and go further as a remark. It is, as Foreign Policy Institute remarked, that it is a time of personality-driven politics now. If you look even beyond our space, and you mentioned that, and I think, yes, the presence and the power of certain political figures is essential these days. So yes, maybe that's the lacking segment in some of the countries, maybe that's others, and as Valerio said, we had certain gaps filled in this way, so maybe, yeah, you're right, it's the politics of big personalities.
If I may fire back a question at you, was it personality politics that turned the tide in Moldova? I don't think so.
I mentioned the situation when it took time to grow. But in the end, I think the turning point was in approximately late April 2019, when the first of the political leaders who, and obviously the then regimes tried to manipulate to avoid. We had the then President Igor Dodon, who formerly was pro-Russian, in the same time being a puppet of the oligarch Plakhatniuk, who tried to sabotage this idea to create this majority. It wasn't easy. We played on Russian interests, so that wasn't an easy point. But at one point, I remember, I think it was, as I mentioned, late April or early May 2019, when there was the first leader of the party, Maia Sandu, who said, yes, we will do that. They had, I mean, socialists were trying to put some conditions, like elect our Speaker of Parliament. And the other pro-European leader at that time, Andrei Năstase, says, no, I will never vote for this, blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's really, it should be important who is the Speaker of Parliament, it doesn't matter. And it was Maia Sandu who said, yes, we'll do that. So that was a moment, a break-even point, when she proved to be, from a simple kind of a potential, one of the leaders of the opposition, someone who can take responsibility. So that was the point. Thanks God we didn't need a revolution for that. It was enough to have more or less political processes. Then we had a funny period from June 7th, I think, till 14th, when we had two governments in Moldova, doesn't recognizing one of another's legitimacy. It's a very interesting period. But that, of course, that made difference. So either you take responsibility for what you, and you prove that you could not be, you are not just seeking for votes, but ready to take responsibility and to do not what's popular, obviously, but what's needed. And people appreciated that. So that moment, I think in May 2019, was the moment when Maia Sandu won presidential elections, and not later. What happened later was, you know, still important, but that was the moment which kind of boosted her. Yeah.
Just to quickly add up on what Regis was saying, and also Valeriu, I absolutely agree that political opposition in Georgia is very weak and they need to do their homework. But I think that we're also missing this bigger geopolitical picture. I mean, sorry, but in Moldova there was a big Western interest and big Western presence in the lead up to these elections and to the previous elections. And there was no this presence and interest in Georgia. We were part of these consortiums that were built in Moldova to monitor elections together. There has been increasing funding towards support to NGOs and media, and there is no such thing in Georgia right now. So when we're talking about resilience in Moldova or successes in Armenia, there is a huge difference when it comes to Georgia. So we should not miss this point that, sorry, but democracy is a group project. Georgia only cannot build itself democracy if there is no Western strong resolve.
Fair enough. We will entertain one more question for the audience, if there is one. I don't see anyone. Excellent. Then let me finish on by thanking Tamar and other organizers as well for giving us this wonderful opportunity to discuss this incredibly important topic, to hear these wonderful insights. And thank you very much for being present, for listening to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're moving to the parallel